Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of war in Ukraine. Let's go to another Chris Owicki thread. Always good value, these threads. They give a lot of context and information. Two videos have been published from Russian former convicts who signed contracts to fight in Ukraine as part of the Storm Z assault unit. They provide an insight into the units which have been used by the Russians to carry out so-called meat assaults. These are the penal units taken from convicts serving in prison. So what does the thread have to say? The two men were selected for special detachment known as the Blacks for their all-black outfits worn for night missions. They were entirely wiped out within only 6 weeks of the contracts being signed. Their story is told in the thread below, and there is this thread here. Russian convicts fighting in Ukraine are becoming ghost soldiers. When they die, their relatives lack any documentation that they signed contracts and being denied compensations on their deaths, and their bodies are not being returned for burial. So that's something I've shared with you before. So we'll now go into the story. On April the 7th, 2023, shortly before the men were sent into the meat grinder near Svatova in eastern Ukraine, several of them recorded videos giving their accounts as an apparent testimony to their relatives in case they were killed. They were subsequently listed as missing. So, as that other thread was going to go and talk about, it's the idea that the Russian armed forces don't have to pay out compensation if they list their soldiers as missing rather than dead. Dead and injured gets contractually, they're contractually obliged to give compensation. I don't know the situation with convicts actually, but nonetheless, missing is much more easy on the stats than and the economy than dead. So by this time, the men had realized that, in the words of another member of the detachment, they were, quote, absolutely effed. They were serving in secret without documentation, pay, or ID tags, and say in the video that they are like shadows. I mean, you might think, hey, I'm secret, I'm serving secretly, and so I haven't got all these bits and pieces. But the realization should be the reason I don't have these bits and pieces is so that if I die, no one knows anything about my death. In other words, I'm the one being manipulated. I'm not some kind of secret in the shadows fighter. I am being manipulated. This has been a typical story for the many Russian convict fighters who have been termed ghost soldiers for the way the authorities have concealed their existence, covered up their deaths, and refused to compensate their relatives. And that is, he's referring to another thread there that I've no doubt gone through with you. At this time, the men were holed up in an abandoned house in a ruined Ukrainian village near the front line. In the first video, Yuri Yakolev, call sign Koroshi, a former inmate of the IK4 for Nosovo penal colony, says, quote, "We were trained at the firing range in the city of Dokuchayevsk for a month. Then we were separated from the general group, as I've already said, and sent to the slaughter. There was no command to storm any buildings. The instructions were given by the Misha in Donbass, a Russian mill blogger pictured below. Misha in Donbass was the drone guy that was killed near Krasnohorivka, just north of Mariinka. So that's interesting. So Misha in Donbass, yeah. The commander, surname, first name, patronymic, who commands in the Avdiivka direction. We don't know anything. We have no documents, no dog tags, this guy says. Yeah, so for what reason, I don't know, but we guess that some temporary military IDs were brought to us. At the very beginning, we signed in them, and then they were taken away under the pretext that new ones were being printed. Although in principle we are all servicemen, we have served compulsory military status before. We have our military IDs, so they're getting these fake IDs effectively, or new IDs. But questions why? There are guys here with my colony, and from other colonies. Now they will give a short interview in this same video just to be on the safe side too. The Russian Ministry of Defense will not say that we are all together, so that just in case something happens and we are all left on the battlefield, our parents could at least get some compensation. He hands over to another man, Anton Olegovich, from the Kemerovo region, who says, quote, "Here, please look at where we are in the fighting. All the houses have been destroyed. There is nothing left alive here. Here we are in a very unclear situation, and we don't know what to do. We are very worried, not only for our lives, but for our relatives. We will not receive a penny for our lives. It's just some bigwigs with big epaulets. We really don't want that to happen. That's why we really want you to hear us, to help us. At least, at least not us, at least our parents. If within a month it is not favourable, if we do not get in touch within a month, within 2 months, then it means we are no longer alive. And so we would very much like you to take some action and at least let them pay our relatives, our children, our close ones. Thank you." Yakovlev adds, because here it's usually done like this on the field, people stay on the battlefield, so there's no payout. In other words, they're not picking dead soldiers up off the battlefield and they just say they're missing, and so they don't have to pay out. They can then say you are either in captivity or something else. Relatives accordingly receive nothing, so that there are no misunderstandings. Because, let's be honest, let's tell you honestly, we have been thrown here. If you don't listen objectively, it's unlikely that we'll live until the 27th of April, till the 20th of August. That's why we're recording all these videos. A third man, Alexander Simkin, from the Pskov region, says, quote, "This is where I am in my position. Tomorrow will be Saturday. It will be 3 weeks. I've been on the front line all these 3 weeks. On the first day, we were hit with mortars from 3 groups that came in with me. We were supposed to storm point 024. There were at least 10 to 15 men who survived, who are currently in position at this point. We are simply shot down like cannon fodder with mortars, and no artillery supported us. Almost all my comrades died. What am I doing there? I keep telling you they send us to attack a tank with an automatic rifle. In these 3 weeks, one might say I was born again 3 times. A mine came towards me twice, and once they fired at me from a tank. In all cases, there were 200 killed and 300 wounded, and I escaped with only 2 minor concussions." Yakovlev concludes by highlighting the way that the Storm Z men have been effectively erased from existence by the Russian authorities. Quote, "And the most important thing I forgot to tell you is that our relatives contacted the military commission. For some reason, we are in the zone of a special military operation. We didn't go through the military enlistment office at all. We were promised some cards to which money would be transferred. None of this was fulfilled. We were only paid 40,000 rubles, that's $410. At first, it was just an advance, since on some signed on some phony paper. There's no current account on Gosolslugi, that's the Russian State Public Services portal. The mum of one of our comrades called the prison where he sat for 12 years. They told him that he had never been there at all. So we are not here at all. We are like shadows, you know? So that's why we're just asking for help. But family, friends, media, I don't know. And all these videos were released so that, well, even if we die, God forbid, it'll help the guys who will come here next time." And think that next time has been and gone. In the second pair of videos recorded by doomed Storm Z squad of Russian convict soldiers before they went on their final assault, 2 men speak out about their experiences on the front line. Again, says Chris Wiki. So this continues. The first video is summarized in the thread below. It was recorded on 7th of April 2023 in an abandoned house in a ruined Ukrainian village near Svatova, and that's what I've just gone through with you, in eastern Ukraine. The men had only signed up 6 weeks earlier, but were soon all killed or wounded. The second video is introduced by Alexander Vladimirovich Lokshin from the Leningrad region, call sign Little Man. He was recruited from a prison colony and was serving an 8-year sentence before signing a military contract on February the 20th. When he got to the front, he found that, quote, "They sent me to the trenches in a field with a Kalash against mine," so a Kalashnikov, "shelling, bombing, and a tank. Also, sometimes they," the Ukrainians, I don't know, "send us bumblebees," which are drones. Horror. "We're by ourselves," he says. "There are no weapons. The food is poor. The corpses are not removed. There was no support from artillery or tanks. They come here. They are bombed. They don't know their nose here anymore. They don't show their nose here anymore, sorry. Yes, there are red zones. It's about 1 kilometer from here, maybe a little less. For example, about 700 meters. There are several of our positions that are constantly being attacked from that side by tanks. There is some kind of biochemical plant in Donetsk. They have an underground city there. There's lots of technology. It's all visible. but there's no way to get there. Everything there needs to be bombed, and we simply hold back the attacks as best we can. They give you a few RPGs, bumblebees, and that's it, and sit in the trenches. Tanks come every day, mines, shelling from 3 positions, grad fire every day, various shrapnel. Major Kobadladze, call sign Old Man, is considered to be in charge, but he is also in Donetsk, I understand, a higher authority. We haven't seen any of them. We don't know them. We were brought here by car. It's unclear what to do. People are dying every day, maimed, concussed, with severed limbs. We carried them ourselves, carried them out of the battlefield several times. It's total ass here. How are we supposed to live? And it is unlikely that we'll live to the end of this contract. We don't know what to do. We don't know. There are no reinforcements. Those mobilized from here look at the tanks at the very first trench and immediately run away in an unknown direction. We can't do that. We have no documents, no dog tags, no military papers, like no cars, no phones, no SIM cards. We have nothing at all. If something just happens to this serviceman, if within a month or 2 months he will not be in touch and will be like all the majority here lying on the field, he wants his brother to receive certain payments that our state is obliged to pay. The second soldier in the video introduces himself as Maxim Valerievich Kozlov. He had been serving an 11-year sentence without signing a contract, but like the rest of the men, had not received any documentation. Kozlov says, "We don't know how to continue living. We can't go on here. You can't go there." We are most worried not about our lives and the fact that we will die here, but that our relatives will not be provided with financial assistance since all the guys are lying here, lying missing, and some uncle, senior soldier, is getting money for this. I find, like, a bit of an aside here, I find it interesting that a number of times we've heard this, not just today, but in previous threads. They say, look, I don't mind if fighting, or I don't mind if I die. There's this kind of like just acceptance of their lot. And I guess you get that in the situations like that. But there's this indignation that, look, if I'm going to die, then my relatives need to be compensated. But there's no issue that they're fighting the Ukrainians. They're still obviously the enemy, and there must be some implicit belief in the righteousness of this fight. It's just that I'm going to die, and I want my money to go to my relatives. Anyway, to continue, we are adults. We understand everything about everything, but this is not war. This is not war when you are bombed from above with everything in a row in a trench, and there's no support from our people at all. There's no communication at all. The radio communication is bad. Materially, there is no provision whatsoever. There's no food or anything like that. And the most important point is simply that if really, something happens to us, this is the most important thing, so that we can shake up this whole situation. I repeat once again, we will shoot a video from the front position of the guys' corpses and so on, You will see all of this. All of this will be filmed. The men appear to have never had a chance to do so. They took part in an assault a few days later and never returned. Their relatives have received no compensation. I mean, I've seen footage of corpses lying all over the shop, particularly around Bakhmut. Still continuing to see that. There's quite a lot of footage now coming out from Avdiivka that shows what an absolute calamity that has been for the Russian forces, and that's something I've spoken about for 10 days now. It's just been this repeated throwing humans and equipment basically into death and destruction. Been very little sense to it. Although I was reading today, and I'll go through this tomorrow, I have an understanding that Putin was not in Rostov recently, was he not? And there might have been the aim to get an achievement in Avdiivka by the time Putin got to Rostov, but that didn't happen. As if to say, welcome, and we're going to announce some really good news for you on the front line. But it didn't happen. All that happened is that they sacrificed all those men for no conceivably sensible gains. So yeah, that is, again, nothing unusual. We've seen these plenty of times before, but it's just interesting to get these accounts, first-hand accounts of what Russian soldiers are experiencing, and it's great, is it? I'm going to go back to Professor James Carafano. Carafano, sorry, who's going to talk. He talked a little bit about the options Zelensky had going forward with regard to how this conflict ends. I just dipped into that yesterday. He's met Zelensky before, and I just want to give someone's opinion of what Zelensky is like. some interesting observations here. We hear quite often from people who have met Zelensky that they are impressed by him. This is what Carafano says.
And what did you make of President Zelensky?
So he is a very serious man, and he is very well informed. And he took, I thought, both criticism and constructive ideas very, very well. And I really felt that our time with him wasn't just, okay, be nice to the Americans and then send them on their way. I think he's a genuine leader. I really do. And I think he's trying to do the best thing for his country.
We'll come to history later. You're a historian by training as well. Did you feel the sense meeting him that this was somebody with the hand of history on his shoulder?
Yeah, and it's funny because how do you know these things? It's easy in retrospect. You look in the history books and see these things in the pages. And when you meet people up front and personal, I've met so many leaders in so many places. And at the end of the day, they're just people, just like everybody else. And there's history that kind of makes them larger than life and everything else.
I thought that was a really interesting point there. And this is something I thought about before. I thought I remember thinking when David Cameron was PM of UK, and if I ever met him, whether I would be, I think I wrote an article on this, about whether I'd show him any deference. I'm going to have to dig that article out. I wrote an article on deference, thinking, why would I defer? Why would I show any deference to you? Why would I show that I'm a human being? You're a human being. Yes, you're the PM of this country. And then I went on to why would I show particular deference to the Queen when she was alive, or the King now, right? And yeah, you might say it's because I'm a lefty liberal, but it's probably all mixed up with the same ideas, which is when you do philosophy all the time, you just question everything, and you question things like people's value in society compared to you. And why does the PM of my country intrinsically have more value, or the Queen have more value than me? Why should I show deference to you, other than it's just tradition? You are just another human being, and you were, in the Queen's case, lucky enough to be born into that position, and you have not merited that position in any way. You might have done really good stuff over your life. I'm not denying any of that. But in the sense of where you are in that position, that was by birth. And obviously this leads into arguments against monarchy and all stuff like that. But then with the Prime Minister, okay, you were voted in, but there's an awful lot of privilege that certainly he's got, one of the Eton boys, the amount of legs up you've had throughout life to get you where you are. Yes, you've been voted in, but I didn't vote you in, and so on and so forth. And you think you are just a human. So I'm not. It's not that I'm trying to do you down or trying to do me up. We are just humans, and I would just treat him like another human being, and wouldn't be like, oh yeah, That's how I like to think I'd react. But you probably get kind of starstruck, scare quotes, starstruck in some kind of way. But I don't think I would. It'd be like, and I would like to think I'd challenge someone quite robustly, even if they are, supposedly some kind of more important figure than me. And so that was an interesting that little nugget that you gave there, which is absolutely right. People are just people, right? And it's only history books that put such great importance on them in a way that sees them outstrip their humanity. I don't mean humanity in that way, but like their humanness. And sometimes we look back in history and it might be Winston Churchill or Abraham Lincoln or whatever, but these guys are all human. They still go for a crap every day, and they still need a shower, and they still walk their dog or do whatever. These are just human beings that do human things, and sometimes they get elevated, don't they? Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on one philosophically speaking.
But it's just kind of the person in front of you. And honestly, what you look for in a strategic leader is character and competence and the ability to think critically. I certainly did find him a leader of character, particularly in the sense of his dedication as a commander-in-chief and his myopic energy at fighting for the Ukrainian people. He was certainly competent. I mean, it was impressive to hear the facts at his disposal and his command of them and his knowledge. And certainly he is a critical, tough-minded thinker. There's a wonderful book called Supreme Command by Elliot Cohen, American historian, number of case studies through histories of political military leaders. And his point is that it's not just that I do the political stuff and then you go off and fight the war. And it's not that I do the war stuff and I don't care about politics. That real civil military command is the ability of political leaders to focus on their task, but to understand the military context, and military leaders to understand their mission, but to understand that they have to operate within a political context.
Which is interesting because Zelensky and many other military political leaders, or political leaders at times of military, times of war, get accused of getting too involved with the military. But it must be really difficult not to, because you are leading the country that is engaged in war. And there must be some sense where you are responsible for how the war progresses in some way. And your own political national strategy is wrapped up in the strategy of war. So you can understand why a leader would want to get involved, but then you get the arguments such as some make about, say, Bakhmut. I think Bakhmut was a military success personally. That's my interpretation, although I was flip-flopping at the time and didn't know. But in hindsight, and actually towards the end of it, I was like, no, this is fixing Russian troops. It is attriting Russian troops. And it's been the death of Wagner. Don't forget that. In fact, you could argue it caused the death of Prigozhin, because that train of events happened as a result of Wagner being absolutely done over. You can really lay that down at the success of Bakhmut as a decision. Now, certain people like Michael Kaufman and other analysts are saying, well, Arestovich is now saying this more recently, that Bakhmut was a bad decision. And I would disagree with that. And it was a political decision of Zelensky. But I don't know. And this chap here is saying that he has a good grasp of both, and a good hold on each of those things and how they interact. So I'm just going to rewind a little bit.
Political leaders to focus on their task, but to understand the military context, and military leaders to understand their mission, but to understand that they have to operate within a political context. And pointing Lincoln, for example, Lincoln and Grant is two great examples of that. I honestly found Zelensky in that mode. Here was a guy who really understood his role as president, but it was also clear that he understood the military operations and what the generals are facing and how they had to do. So yeah, I actually came away with a fair degree of confidence. To preface this, the last time I was in Ukraine was in 2017, before the war. And the occupation was considered an act of terrorism. So the military wasn't in charge. The Home Office was in charge. And they were briefing me on their command structure, and it was absolutely Byzantine. I mean, I came away with it thinking, like, if these guys have to fight a war, they're in really deep trouble. So I will say something dramatic happened between 2017 and the outbreak of the war. They made a lot of progress in their command and control and other aspects as well. And here I do kind of credit the previous administration, which I think is something we don't talk about. We always kind of say, well, Republicans are skeptical about Ukraine. But the reality is under the previous president, there was an initial cache of arms, which was absolutely vital in terms of that. And there was this kind of openness and training and integration and planning and everything else, which I think without that, if that had not happened and led to transformation in the military, they wouldn't have withstood the whole thing. And the other thing that's really obvious is we can have a water under the bridge argument here. We can have a big debate about how much commitment are we going to give to the Ukraine going forward, the U.S., everything else. But the reality is, without American military aid, there wouldn't be a Ukraine today. There just wouldn't be. Doesn't matter how tough the Ukrainians have fought. There's a Ukraine today because of U.S. military aid. In history's eye, I think the issue is settled. There will be a free and independent Ukraine. It's because of U.S. military aid. Lots of other things matter a lot. European contribution, the fighting spirit, and the commitment of the Ukrainians. But so when we debate about what will America do, to me, it's like, you know what? America did the stuff that had to be done when it needed to be done. And that's what created the opportunities we have today to go forward.
But then,
interesting. And there's lots to say about that. I mean, we could bring in the whole, the Trump administration, or at least a military aspect. The Department of Defense did do the right things, and UK was involved and NATO were involved in training from that sort of, he was talking about 2017 onwards. they'd been involved since 2014 onwards, and that was an ongoing thing, and that was really, really important. You could argue a lot about Trump doing the whole bribing for dirt on Biden and withholding weapons until that came about, but or in the end it didn't. But the whole debacle around that was really controversial. So yeah, I'd say that the US military did a good job in putting the foundations in place along with NATO. And he's right. Like the US military, without the US military, Ukraine would be screwed. There's no doubt about that. What's good though is that European nations like Germany are really, really significantly helping now, to the same tune in comparable ways to the US. And if you add the EU as a whole, we're talking about size, population, money, etc., etc., all the things we discussed before. There's a lot of catching up that's been done. So, but certainly at the beginning of this conflict, a lot of trouble there for Ukraine that was averted because the US was strong and robust early doors. I wouldn't disagree with that. Right, I said I would pop through this interview of a crew for a tank, Swedish version of a Leopard 2 tank. I thought was pretty interesting. I wanted to just pop through it. I'm going to play it and read out the subtitles to you because I think that is most useful, given that many of you listen to this and don't watch it. But I'm going to put it on quick speed if I can, just to go through the subtitles a bit more quickly. So here we go. And let's turn the Ukrainian down. So the wild animal hiding in the tree line is a Leopard 2 tank. Like predators, we hide, jump out, work and roll back. Says this guy. Vitaly, the commander of the vehicle, is not a cadre officer. He's for 30 years worked as a miner, but he had a deserved rest. But then the country called and said I was needed. So Vitaly admits he's great responsibility for being trusted with a Western vehicle. I know that some people, yes, they envy us because of course he's the lucky one in a Leopard 2, right? Whereas others are driving around in captured T-62s or whatever. Anyway, he says those who work on other vehicles. Vitaly serves since the start of the year, but didn't have the opportunity to work on Ukrainian or Soviet tanks. He went to Sweden as soon as possible to learn how to fight on a Leopard. The speed of training surprised even the Swedish instructors. They admitted that in 9 weeks we completed a program that their cadres do in 1.5 years. So 9 weeks they did 1.5 years worth of training. That's phenomenal. But as he says here, we train for 13 hours a day. Hard at first, got easier then. This vehicle is a Swedish version of a German tank released in the mid-90s, but Ukrainians received it in perfect condition. This is quite interesting. Their training ground was 2 by 3 kilometers at best. So you got 2 by 3 kilometers. That's where they do all their training. And then, as he goes on to say, they train for a day, and then he serviced the tank for a week. That's why it's in such good condition. Obviously, it's never gone to war. It does 1 day of training, 1 week of servicing, 1 day of training, 1 week of servicing, just driving around 2 by 3 kilometers. He's like, we do up to 100 kilometers of distance in one combat mission. Right? So there's no way it's as well kept up as it used to be. But anyway, he says he's fighting on his Leopard tank since midsummer, but with no direct tank battles yet. That's a significant nugget to take in. Due to the activity of artillery and drones here in the Le Mans direction, it is risky. Yeah. Reinforced armor and the ability to reverse at up to 30 kilometers an hour, talked about that this morning, allows a Leopard not to turn its back on the battlefield. The ammo is located behind. On the one hand, a vulnerable place, but on the other, it provides safety for the crew. In Russian tanks, ammo is placed below the crew. The front, he says, is particularly strong. It will take an anti-armor mine. The most important is the crew, regardless of the weaponry. Thanks to this, the crew will be preserved. If the ammo explodes, God forbid, it will eject the whole ammo and save crew. Vladimir is a loader. He has a lot to say about firepower. He says a tank can hit an airborne target. here is Vladimir. He says, we can take down a helicopter with an arrow. Arrow has a range of 11 kilometers. We know how to do this. We were trained well. Anti-armor round, and he shows that. That's the armor piercing round there. The arrow is 70 centimeters long, so it can pierce through 70 centimeters of armor. And I presume these are the shells that basically turn into almost a molten dense rods, like an arrow, like he says, and that goes through the armor of the tank and actually goes through the other side. There's no explosive nature to that shell. It's not a high explosive shell. It just punches through the tank, but the pressure difference will pretty much kill everyone in the tank, and the spalling that might well result from that. So all the bits of stuff that flies out inside the tank, almost like shrapnel. Imagine that small area with all sorts of equipment shredding you as a human, shredding other bits of equipment. That's what does the damage. You don't need to blow up the tank. You can just send this arrow kind of through it, and that's what does the damage. Anyway, yeah, it's made of wolfram, does a great job. It breaks through anything. It can go through houses, through wood. It won't impact its trajectory. That's interesting. The immediately noticeable thing is the space inside the tank. Every crew member has space for a personal weapon. You can easily sleep in it, he says. And the loader here, commander there, gunner in front of you, and the driver on his own spot. So pretty cozy. Soldiers say this vehicle gives noticeable superiority. Noticeable superiority in combat. The Western tank aiders, they tank Western aiders. Oh no, they thank Western aiders and say if it wasn't for them, the results would have been different. This is going back to what Caravano was saying. Like, if the US didn't help out, they'd be screwed. Because, yeah, true. Fear. You can say they're afraid of this tank. Yes, so good stuff there. That is a highly competent tank, and you'd presume fairly competent tank crew, but haven't been engaged in any tank battles, or I guess, I don't know, in any battles yet. I don't know. He has talked about going on combat missions. So I'm not quite sure what he has or hasn't done, or they have or haven't done. But I think it's interesting that they've had that tank since midsummer, and they haven't really used it yet on the front line because of the threats of artillery and drones. And this is why the Ukrainians are spending so much time and effort degrading the Russian capabilities in that way. And the last thing I'm going to touch on today is this. I don't know what to make of this, probably nothing. But here we have the host of Soloviev Live. It's not Soloviev, but it's another host of the live program that he does. Soloviev is one of the propagandists, TV propagandists. And he is called the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, spokesperson, Zakharova. So we have seen her say a lot of stuff previously. I've reported on her saying things. And this guy is saying that she is, in Russian obviously, a drinking scum. Now, you might think, oh, so what? I don't really care. Yeah, pretty irrelevant. About concentrating on little things. This, to me, looks like fracturing a little bit. When you have people on TV who are calling out other people. We had recently Simonyan talking about setting off a nuclear blast in Siberia, and then Siberians calling her out saying, if you don't retract that, I'm gonna take you to court. And then her then releasing an apology. And you've got you've got mill bloggers openly criticizing Putin, then some of them getting put in prison or being chased off or being, there are fractures that are definitely becoming more evident, I think. And someone just a little throwaway comment like that, it shows that there's no unity there in what Russia is doing in prosecuting this war. And you can understand that because it's going really badly for them. It's a year and a half. This 3-day special military operation is a year and a half old plus. And it is resulting in the deaths of a lot of people and a loss of Russia's military capabilities. This is an absolute unmitigated disaster. No matter what happens to Ukraine going forward, this is already a disaster. Think of the sanctions, think of the economic peril that Russia are in now that they weren't in 2 years ago, right? It's no surprise that people in the elites in Russia and the people speaking on TV are going to be torn between having to toe the party line and say, oh, how wonderful everything is, and having this frustration at how it's going. Either a frustration because you know it's the wrong war, it shouldn't have been done, and the whole thing is just a complete balls up, or frustration that it's the right war, but it's being prosecuted entirely ineptly. So those two things can be happening in any one of these people. They could just be fake hardcore ultra-nationalists and just that's their job. But in reality, they think this whole thing is a farce and should never have happened. Or they think they are ultra-nationalists and like, God damn, yeah, we need to be doing over those Ukrainians, but we're just doing a very bad job of it. Either way, they're going to be feeling this tension the whole time. I mean, you can't lie all the time, can you? Like your entire day. I mean, I have a real problem with lying at all. I hate it. It's not part of my DNA. I think I get that from my dad. And he was like that. I couldn't lie to an insurance company. Couldn't lie, and I have a real issue with that. But, that's just one lie. If you're lying all day long, maybe it just becomes part of what you do, who you are. But I don't know. It must be difficult. And then at some point, you just must be some frustration that just wants to get out. And in this case, maybe it's some propagandist saying that the Minister of Foreign Affairs is drinking scum. And you have these attacks. As long as it's not on Putin, it seems to be all right to maybe attack people below. Gerasimov, Shoigu, be fair game. But I don't know. I think it's some representation some reflection of the fact that things are not going well for the Russians, and I think they know it. Let me know what you think. Anyway, thank you very much. Take care. Speak soon. I just want to give a public thanks, though, before I let you go. I get a lot of support, and I really appreciate that. And sometimes support comes from people that call themselves someone, don't put their names on, buy me a coffee. But just thank you to Ivan Button, to lots of someones. Johnny McNeven, Andrew Lab Monkey, Thomas Jackson, Geert, Vicky Stewart, as ever, Justinus, Chris, lots of someone's, Fusion, Kevin, Smith, Glenn Greater X, always great supporters, Neil, Christoph, brilliant, Andres Erdovics, such a great supporter, Rob Sharber, so good, thank you, and to I think someone, Dan, just massive thanks, Dan. Really appreciate all of your support and the many on YouTube, thanks, PayPal and whatnot that allow me to do what I do. Really appreciate that. Anyway, go and enjoy the rest of the day.